I actually do not get your second point because I know I am conscious,
Why?
and you know
How do you know that?
because I do.
And I would argue that just because you think you can recognize these things doesn't mean those things are accurate. The brain is not, without fault. People hallucinate. Does that make those hallucinations real? I think that has any disproving of free will, because cause and effect does not fundamentally say that there's no will involved. You slap somebody, that's the cause, and then they have the free will of choosing how to react, what the effect of that is. There's always going to be a reaction of some sort. There's always going to be an effect, but that is not predetermined.
I feel like you feel like slapping me right now. Positive experience is pleasure, or it could be happiness. A negative experience is pain, or it could be like immense suffering. That's positive and negative experience, and we act so that we have more positive experience and less negative experience, right?
So if I wanted to prove your point and I chopped my arm off, am I really getting a more positive experience just by proving you wrong than I would be getting if I didn't cut my arm off? That doesn't really make...
The very positive experience is the satisfaction of proving me wrong. That's the positive experience here. What's going to happen inside of the universe is heat death. That's what the flow is going towards. It's heat death. This could be used to literally universalize ethics. Do you think that what we form as ethics is really just what we want? What we want is part of this flow. And what this flow is really going towards is heat death. Would you argue that?
Are you the one arguing for nihilism now? I'm confused.
I'm not arguing for nihilism. I'm asking
because I'll just tell you, it seems like you're leading me to say that we should just kill everything. Because that's the state that it wants to be in. It wants to be at absolute zero. We should just try our best to speed up the flow.
Maybe.
Right. We don't want to do a Romeo and Juliet, and we don't want to decide to burn everything down and then realize, oh wait, there was something, we didn't have all the information. Once something complicated as the brain develops, then it almost develops its own flow that can conflict with other flows and try to manipulate other flows.
So what are you arguing? That flows conflict against each other?
I'm arguing that there's no point in valuing the flow if flows can contradict.
So I'll ask the first question then. What is your view on consciousness? Just in general.
I'm not completely decided on it. I think it's complicated. I think it just depends on how you want to think about it. I'd say it depends on who you're talking about. We would just have to get our definition settled and use that definition to talk about it.
Okay. So let me sidetrack you a little bit. Do you believe in free will?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. All right. I just want to know that so I can steer the conversation. So consciousness, you want a definition, right?
Yes.
I would say just simple experience, right? So you see an apple, for instance, it's red. You are experiencing the redness of the apple. You also experience your thoughts. You experience the environment, right?
Yeah.
So our intuition tells us that we are conscious, but a rock or a building, whatever, they are not conscious. They don't experience, at least not like what we do,
Yes.
So, yeah, you agree with that, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I would like to ask you, you know you are conscious, right? That you experience. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, that was a little bit rhetorical, but would you say other humans experience? Would you say other humans are conscious?
Yes.
All right. So why do you think that?
You asked such a simple question that it's like, you know how simple questions can be hard to explain? Because it's like,
That's the thing about
because
it.
it's like
It is
common sense.
yeah, it is a simple question apparently, but if you dig deeper into it, you realize it's not as easy to answer.
It's not easy to answer, but it's easy to understand.
Yes,
Because
but
you're just talking about how do I know that other people are the same as me, right?
sort of like they're conscious, like you.
Right.
They're not just like rocks in that they are not experiencing. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Um, I mean, this is all has to do with the assumptions of taking in all the variables of knowing how I am and my reality and my experiences and being able to see that other people seem to be reacting and having a reality similar to mine. So I can basically just assume that they're very similar to me to a certain degree, depending on how closely their reactions and the way that they act is similar to mine.
Yes. So they look like you, right? They have eyes. They walk around. They if you look in the mirror, you'll see that you look just like them. So why not infer that they are conscious? You know,
Well, that's not as important to me as the other things, the non-physical things.
like
It,
what they report, like their
like yeah,
feelings,
like
their
if
thoughts.
like it doesn't matter if a dog started acting like a human. I'm not going to treat it differently because it looks differently than me. It's going to be like, oh wow, this thing I can tell is having a similar experience. If it was able to talk, you know what I mean?
Yes, and so you make an inference that they are actually experiencing very similar things that you do.
Yeah.
What would you say about animals? Do you think they have sentience,
Are you using what do you mean by sentience again?
consciousness? It's interchangeable. Like, do you think they experience?
I think that they have a different level of consciousness than we do.
That's valid. Um, yes, because their brains are.
They are less aware. So some
But
like some people I think would use the definition of consciousness is would be being aware of themselves, which some animals are not, but they are aware of, you know, the external. So it just depends on which definition you'd be using. You're using the one that would include animals.
yeah, so I kind of distinguish between consciousness and self-consciousness. Self-consciousness is being aware of yourself. You know, consciousness in general is just basic experience.
Right. And
So,
all animals have that basic experience.
okay, all right. So, taking that into consideration that they experience to some degree, do you think they deserve like rights, like animal rights? Do you think our ethics should include them
On a scale,
on a scale? Yes,
according to their consciousness.
to a certain extent, depending on their level of consciousness or experience. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I want to ask you, I don't know, what relationship do you think our consciousness has to our physical brain?
I mean, I don't really know what exactly you're asking.
Okay, I knew I had to clarify. So, you have our physical brain, right? It's composed of neurons, you know?
Are you
How,
trying to ask if consciousness is outside the body or not? Like,
sorta, yeah,
if it's disconnected from biology?
yes.
I would say there's no evidence that it's disconnected from biology, but there's not really any. I don't know if there's evidence of it being connected because I don't know enough about biology.
That's all right. Do you think like ideas are actually physical in a sense? Like they are like existing in these neurons? Like, or do you think that consciousness is just a separate experience that arises from like the interaction of these neurons between each other?
I think it's most likely that it is connected to biology.
So you could say that consciousness and the brain are one and the same, right? Like the physical brain and the mind, they're the same thing. Is that what you think?
And this is it's a problem where I mean I'm really going off of limited information because I'm not a biologist and I don't know everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Okay, I get.
because
Yeah.
the only thing that makes me not for sure with the connection is because I don't know if it's possible that in the future we will be able to replicate everything that a brain does with a computer. And then it becomes very complicated to know the difference. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, is there something different inherently about the machine versus the brain now? Like, we won't really know until we get to that point to be able to tell whenever it can do everything, is it actually doing it all exactly the same, or is there something missing, which would be consciousness?
Maybe.
So we don't
Maybe.
really know.
That is a good point. Maybe we will never know actually because the only thing we know that is conscious for sure is our own self, you know? Like the only thing we experience is fundamentally within our own mind.
I would argue against that.
I kind of know you would because people like give evidence that they're experiencing the same thoughts and feelings as you do, but I'm sort of more highlighting the fact that consciousness is like a very difficult thing to conceptualize.
Well,
Like,
I could argue it on both sides, as in like I could argue against your point in two different ways. One point would be that I can tell that others are conscious, and then another point is if you're right and we can't tell that others are conscious, then we can't even tell that we're conscious. We don't know what's going on inside our own heads. We can't prove that we're conscious just because we think we are.
I actually do not get your second point because I know I am conscious, you know,
Why?
and you know
How do you know that?
because I do. But that's the hard thing to understand because yeah, it's just something that you do know. Like
No, no, it's not though. How do you know though? Like what makes you think you're conscious? You can break this down.
I don't know, how would you break it down?
Me, if I was arguing your point, I would say I know I'm conscious because, I can see things, I can think, I can react to things, and I can notice all these processes going on in my brain to be able to recognize that I am conscious. I am able to recognize that.
All right. All right.
And I would argue that just because you think you can recognize these things doesn't mean those things are accurate. The brain is not, without fault. People hallucinate. Does that make those hallucinations real?
Yes, that's right.
So
That's
we
right.
do not know that we are conscious.
So is that actually what you think, or is this like, are you playing a devil's advocate here?
I think it's one or the other. Either we know that we are, and we can most likely guess that other people are, or you have to say we don't really know any of it.
That's a fair point. Um, Now I kind of want to ask. Um, so from the of conception to birth, or even afterwards, where do you think consciousness starts to form? When on the scale of conception to whatever happens in the future, when do you think consciousness starts to really start to form? And what would you
If
say?
if I had to guess, it would be at some stage of brain activity. It would be a certain type of brain activity, would be my guess.
So, do you think consciousness then is something that's just linked to biological processes? Like,
As far as we can tell, I mean, it seems to be that's the closest connection that we can make.
okay, again, that is fair. Now, the similar type of question, but now it's not dealing with an individual, but like across evolution. Do, do you have any like idea on where consciousness started to form, like from the moment life started to now, when the human beings are around?
Are you talking about from starting at bacteria till us, like where
Yeah,
consciousness started?
yeah, on the evolutionary timeline. When do you
Well,
think consciousness would start to form?
to be um, consistent, I would say it would be as soon as a certain type of brain activity started. So whenever we start developing brains, eventually those brains start having certain types of activity, and that activity is what is consciousness.
All right. Now, I would like to take a kind of a step back and ask you, let's think of the human brain itself. The human brain is a biological organ, right? And it's composed of organic molecules. And in turn, these organic molecules are composed of more simple molecules, and the simple molecules are composed of atoms. Atoms are composed of protons, electrons, and neutrons, and it goes down the level of complexity. So, would you say human brains, these physical objects, what's special about the human brain, a physical object, in comparison to other physical objects, that it is able to have this consciousness property?
Well, I mean, this was a conversation about all brains, not just human brains.
Oh, okay, all brains. All brains. They are physical organs, right? They are actually, at a most basic level, they're composed of just molecules.
So, I mean, how is that any different than talking about really almost anything? But I mean, I could go with computer software. All it is zeros and ones. Why are those zeros and ones not computer software? Why is the computer software able to do all these things? But just having zeros and ones
Well,
by
it's able to
themselves.
do those. Yeah, it's able to do those things because it's wired to. It's a machine. It's just the level of complexity you're looking at.
Yeah. Yeah. Those zeros and ones have to be put together a certain way to get the software, right?
Yes, but at the end of the day, it's still zeros and ones at its most basic level. So,
But what I'm saying, the human brain is more, well, brains are more complicated, where I don't really know enough about biology to know how to explain how they're different. But I'm sure there are other things that are similar that once you get to a certain complexity, you know what I mean? It operates differently.
so do you think consciousness then is like connected to a level of complexity?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I would disagree with that. So you have consciousness, right? It's basic experience, right? But I do not exactly think this is a biological thing because um, the whole really is the sum of its parts. The human brain is organic chemistry if you look at it closely. If you like study the human brain, you'll notice that it's just neurons. They are firing at each other. It's um, a web of matter, like carbon-based chemistry and etc. And they fire electrical signals at each other. And yeah, but how would you say that's really connected to consciousness? Because consciousness seems like something that's very, very different on its own. Why should
Okay,
consciousness be restricted to this certain mass of material?
okay, but listen. There seems to be a correlation between um, biology and complexity with consciousness. Animals, other types of animals, the less complex their brains are, the less conscious they are. The human brain is one of the most complicated brains, therefore we are the most conscious. So
Okay,
there is a correlation between them.
so how about we like think of this in terms of a gradient then? Like the more complex it is, the higher level of conscious. But the less complex it is, the lesser level of consciousness. So, do you agree with that?
Uh, I would guess so.
Okay. So, you start at the human brain, that's the most complex, right? You go down a level, you're at the animal level. You go down further, you're at the most simple brain that evolution has ever produced, right?
Hmm.
That's simple, that's the simplest. It's one of the lower forms of consciousness. But do you think you could go down even lower? Do you think that even if a process is minimally complex, like if it's minimally complex, do you think it still has like some type of consciousness to it, even if it's not a brain?
I mean, you could theoretically argue that the brain is a certain, the brain is just a certain type of tool, and there are other things that do similar types of things that aren't a brain, on a smaller scale with like plants and stuff. So you could argue, depending on your definition of consciousness, that those things could have like a very low form of consciousness, maybe.
Yes, and exactly that's what I would agree with. That too has some level of experience. So you have to think, what is the brain itself? It's a decision making center, right? But you see that decision making centers are like across all of biology. Even bacteria have like a decision making center, right? That's their flagellum. It tells them whether they should go towards a chemical or go away from a chemical. That's the decision making center for the bacteria. So even that could have some type of experience. Do you think that is correct?
Yeah, some type of experience.
Okay. Well, let's go even further down the line. So even even before bacteria formed, do you think there could have been like some type of experience that was present?
I mean, depending upon the definition, you could say that every single thing has an experience.
What would you mean?
Like everything has an experience technically. It's just most things aren't aware of the experience.
What would you mean by aware of the experience? Is this self consciousness?
No. Um, I think, like I said, there's a scale, and I don't really know how it is below, once you get below animals, but
Yeah.
I'd say maybe they don't know about any experience they're having. They're not aware of it. It's just naturally reactive.
It's just an experience, right? So let's say they get hit by, um, I don't know, a particle of light. Do you think that generates some experience in them that they experience for like in that immediate moment? Would you say that's something that's makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically everything could be considered on this scale, the simplest of particles to the most complex of human brains. Do you think that is right?
Yeah.
Okay, and I agree with you. And this is a view that's called panpsychism, and it's getting more popular in the 21st century. But basically, it does say that all things have some type of experience, but it differs because the more complex materials have a higher level of experience than like simpler materials, right? Like particles or molecules, etc.
You said experience, right? Okay. Yeah, that makes.
Very basic experience,
But
yes.
like I said, like I was trying to get at was that I think some things aren't aware of experience even though it's happening to them. Like I think animals can be aware of experience. Even if an animal doesn't have self-awareness, it can have an awareness of the external world. Whereas I think that like I don't really know how much awareness of the experience anything below an animal has. It gets dramatically less and less the further down you go.
Yes. So maybe animals do have like maybe it's because they think like they're able to think actually because they have brains, they can think. And so this very thought process, this very capability of thought allows them to um have more of that awareness, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so yes, it's pretty much a gradient. So like basically everything, all particles in the universe, they have this experience, right? And so you can pretty much state that everything, everything is conscious, but you have to specify because consciousness of a human brain is very different than the consciousness of like an electron. So
Like I'm still not for sure about using the word conscious for things that are not aware. Because I think, and I also think that other people think that consciousness has to do with awareness.
okay, so we can stick to the word experience, right?
Yeah, but like I said, this is just using different definitions of consciousness, I think.
Okay, all right. So experience, everything has experience. Now, um, what am I gonna say? Do you know what the word qualia means?
Um, I'm not 100% on the exact definition.
How would you what is your understanding of this word?
Um, some type of experience.
Some type of experience, right? It's different forms of experience.
Yeah.
Would you agree? Okay. So, what would you give an example of different types of experience?
I mean, like I said, I'm not super familiar with the concept. So you might have to give me a couple examples first.
Okay. So, the color red, for instance, right? That's an experience. The qualia of red differs from the qualia of blue. Different types of experience. Or there's the qualia of a certain sound. There's the qualia of tasting something, right? Or touching or smelling something, right? The senses. There's a qualia of thinking.
So to me, the way that you make it sound is it sounds like it's just a specific experience, not a specific type of experience, but a specific experience.
I could go with that too. Yes.
So each thing would be a new one. It's not each like right. Okay, so it's like if I hear the sound twice, they're different, right? Like we, I've never said the word, and sometimes I struggle with saying words for the first
Yeah.
time.
I'm
What
not
is
really sure how it's pronounced either.
Qualia,
you, around there. Yeah, I think so.
Qualia.
Qualia, I
Qualia.
think. Yeah.
So I'm sure we could get Google to speak this thing out.
Yeah, I actually do not know how it's pronounced either. So,
Qualia.
Okay, Qualia.
Qualia. Okay, all right.
Qualia. So, so the qualia of hearing the sound two different times, that it's not the same qualia, they're two different qualias. Is that what you're saying?
The same sound two different times, right?
Yes.
Uh, I would say they're the same type of qualia, but they're two different qualia, but we categorize them as the same type of qualia.
Sure. So by definition, qualia isn't the type, but you can type qualias. But the qualia is just a specific experience.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. I think I understand.
So you have qualia, right? And human brains experience qualia, animal brains experience qualia. The simplest of brains, when brains were first formed down the evolutionary timeline, they have had qualia. Can you say that like particles, like an electron, can you say it has qualia of its own?
I mean, I'm sure it could be debated. I'm not for sure.
It's a weird question I'm asking. So, how about this? Experience, right? Experience itself is formed of qualia. Qualia are sort of like the most simplest experience. Do you think you would
So
agree with that?
this depends on whether qualia is the experience itself or if the qualia inherently implies that you're aware of it. Like, are you aware of qualia or does it just depend?
I think it's just the experience itself. Let's say that experience can be reduced to its smallest constituents, and these constituents are qualia.
Yeah, then everything would experience qualias.
Okay, so electrons would experience qualia, right?
Yes.
You can you think of this is a very strange question I'm going to ask, but can you think of like what kind of qualia an electron can experience?
I don't know if I learned any enough about this to know enough about what they experience.
But in summary, it like we agreed that everything has experience. So everything would have qualia, and an electron would have qualia, and it might have like different types of qualia it experiences, right? So
Yeah.
maybe if it absorbs like let's say a light particle or a photon, let's say it absorbs a photon, could you think this could be classified as a qualia according to the experience of the electron?
The proton would have um, had a qualia.
Okay, so a proton would have a qualia when it absorbs a photon, right?
Yes.
Would it have a different type of qualia if it were to emit the photon instead of absorbing it?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So you could say that everything is not only has experience, everything not only has qualia, but everything has different types of qualia according to the interaction it's doing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now I'm gonna talk. I'm gonna go a little bit off topic, and then I'm gonna try to connect all of this together. So, when you step on a Lego brick, what do you feel?
I mean, pain mainly.
Yes, pain. Would you say this is a qualia? Pain.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you have two qualia, pleasure and pain, right? and you feel them. You experience these qualia, right?
Yes.
But why are you laughing? Do you know where I'm gonna lead this towards?
I'm worried about where you're going to lead it.
Well, we're just following the logic here, right? So you have like pain and pleasure are qualia we know of our own conscious experience, right? What about animals? Could you say they experience pain and pleasure? These qualia.
Yes.
Okay, what about the simplest brain that formed right when brains began to form, like in the history of Earth? Did that have the qualia of pain and pleasure?
Um, Perhaps. I don't know enough about if every single brain has always had it.
Okay. Do you think that molecules or even particles like an electron, do you think they have qualia of pain and pleasure?
No,
Why not?
because pain and pleasure, in my understanding, has to do with nerves and a brain.
Okay. So let me see here. So, okay, so at the very beginning of this conversation, you said we had free will, right?
Yes.
Okay, why would you think we have free will? But what about us, our brains, do you think makes us have free will?
Well, the fact that we're a certain level of conscious means that we're able to actually have, deeper thought and be more aware of our actions, and we're able to dictate our actions. So I would say that that is free will.
We can dictate our actions, but what is dictating our actions? What specifically is dictating our actions in the human brain?
We are choosing to do one thing over the other knowingly.
Okay, but what is influencing us to choose one thing or the other? Is there something influencing us to make a decision?
I feel like that's too broad of a question. I mean, you could say every single thing is influencing us. I don't get how to answer.
Yeah, so everything is influencing us, and in turn, we are influencing things. It's cause and effect, right? Have you heard of
Sure.
a philosophical position known as determinism?
I mean, I might have heard of it. I'm not super familiar, but I could guess what it's about.
Okay, so determinism, everything is determined, right? Because of the way particles interact, we can track their behavior. Similarly, we can track the behavior of the human brain because the human brain is influenced by cause and effect. Would you agree?
Influenced by cause and effect. I think that's a very cause and effect is a very basic principle. I would say that's probably true. Yeah,
Probably true.
yeah.
So that means that all of our actions are already predetermined. Is that correct?
No.
Why not?
Um, because I think consciousness throws this all into a loop in the sense of once you've become conscious enough to be aware of yourself, that's whenever things become much less deterministic. Because now you're aware of yourself, you're aware that you're making choices, and now you're aware of being able to choose.
But is not this awareness itself being caused by something?
Perhaps.
Like this awareness that I'm talking to you on the phone right now, this is influenced by like the the auditory signals in my brain. It's influenced by my conscious understanding of who you and myself are. Um, it's always influenced by something. I do not think you could say that there are some effects that have no causes, you know? Like everything is cause and effect. Like it's not possible for something to arise that is not the effect of no cause. You get what I'm saying?
Yes, but just because, like, cause and effect. Um, just because one cause happens doesn't mean it's going to get the same exact effect every time.
But it's still being caused, right?
Yes,
It's still being determined. Is that
but
correct?
I don't think that has any disproving of free will, because cause and effect does not fundamentally say that there's no will involved. You slap somebody, that's the cause, and then they have the free will of choosing how to react, what the effect of that is. There's always going to be a reaction of some sort. There's always going to be an effect, but that is not predetermined.
I like the example you gave, by the way. But I feel like you feel like slapping me right now.
No,
But so your point is that, like,
I think consciousness makes it much more complicated to the point where I don't know if it's possible to truly determine everything.
maybe not, but I'm leaning towards that it is determined by physical laws.
I,
Because
I could see if you could argue that, you could, that maybe some super high number like 99.9% of things are all deterministic, and it's always going to react this way. But I would say that there is something different about consciousness where there's always a chance that something is going to react in a way that is a way that you could not determine it.
but it has to be determined because it has to obey the laws of physics. Like a, a nerve in the human brain has to fire according to whether it has received enough potential to fire, like it's just it has to act upon it. It can't, the nerve cannot say like, no, I'm not going to fire this signal even though literal physics is forcing me to.
But that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. I'm talking about consciousness. Consciousness. Like I said with the example of slapping, yes, you you feel the pain of the slap, and all those deterministic responses happen. The pain, the swelling, redness, all this happens deterministically.
Yes,
But the conscious reaction is not determined. That is the free will.
but the conscious reaction itself, like, let's say you have the normal reptilian brain, right? And the reptilian brain is instinctive and it instantly like turns away when someone tries to slap them. But then you have the higher reasoning ability of the human brain, like what you call consciousness, right? And you would think that there's some like thing about this higher reasoning system that is preventing the human brain from being fully deterministic. Is that right?
Yes.
I would still disagree with that because it's still like operating on the laws of physics, you know? Like it can't deviate from how the particles are moving, how the particles are supposed to interact with each other. Like there's nothing, it cannot like deviate from it. Like even if someone slaps you, right? And your reptilian brain tells you to like dodge, but then your higher reasoning like powers say like, maybe I should not dodge. Maybe this is like a test experiment or whatever, and I should just remain still. Even then, your higher reasoning ability is being programmed itself by deterministic causes. That's my main argument. But it's it's different in a way because the higher reasoning parts of the brain, um, they're more it's more under its own influence as opposed to external influence, right? Like it's more able to form a reason for itself and act according to that reason. But the very process of forming a reason to act in a different way from the reptilian brain is itself conditioned by cause and effect.
I don't know if you're very good at arguing your point. Um, so um, let me think. So whenever you're slapping somebody, I want to ask you, what causes one person to get upset and slap back versus another person to calm down and then just decide to defuse the situation? How can you determine which would happen?
Different arrangement of neurons in the brain.
And how could you know that?
Um, like I said, the consciousness is the physical human brain, right? It's not really something separate. If someone slaps you, if someone slaps two different people, one fights back, the other restrains themselves, and you're asking like what is causing them to act differently, right?
Yes. How can you determine that one is going to happen instead of the other?
Well, right now we do not have.
How is it already determined?
It's already determined by the arrangement of the particles in their brain. It's determined by the arrangement of neurons. It's determined by how their brain is wired to typically act according to that stimulus.
Because I've already thought of this just now while you were talking, and the only way that you could possibly be able to argue your side, I mean, it's basically kind of pointless in a way, because you could only argue it that technically, if you had every single source of knowledge, everything, if you knew everything, technically, at any given second, you might be able to determine what happens the next second. But you would need to have
Yes.
all knowledge of everything.
Yes, you can determine the trajectory of all the particles in a certain brain. And if you were able to determine that, you could figure out precisely what that person is going to do.
But what I'm saying, you would have to have every single small bit of knowledge. You have to account for the person's mood, their brain chemistry, every single thing that has ever happened to them in their life and everything around them at that moment. You would have to have every single piece of knowledge. You would have to be God to be able to determine these things.
Yes, but in the end, it's still determined, right? It's still predetermined.
I don't think it's determined up until it happens.
But when it happens, like
Do
let's
you,
say it happens,
do you understand?
and
Because it's not determined up until a certain point. Because I would say, 50 years ago, it was not predetermined that I would be here today. There was a chance that it could happen. And at some point, it became 100% determined. But I don't think it was 100% determined 50 years ago.
well, it kind of was, right? Because if you again, if you're like some type of god and you can trace all the interactions, you can predict all the trajectories of the particles and the molecules and etc. Like where they are headed towards. You can predict precisely what is going to happen, how you are going to be born, how you are going to form, and what you are going to do, you know?
So I would argue that that is possible, that it is all 100% predetermined. It's possible, but you cannot say for sure. And I would say the more conscious a thing is, the less likely it is predetermined. But I can't say 100% for sure that it's not, because consciousness is such a complicated thing and the human brain is so complicated. We do not have enough knowledge to know for sure. We don't know enough about it to know if it's possible to predetermine. But I could say the less conscious a thing is, the more predetermined it is, for sure.
Okay, that's fair. But yes, but the human brain is still a physical object, right? And it's still composed of particles at the most reducible level, right?
Yeah, but I just think consciousness is so complicated that it's hard to know if it's something that's determined, like in advance, in a way that you could really predict.
Yeah, yeah, and I get that, but it's still like in a purely theoretical way, it is predetermined because the human brain itself is a collection of particles, just like a rock is a collection of particles, or something else is a collection of particles, right? The thing that is preventing it from being able to be determined is just that it is very complex and chaotic system. So it's very, 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 very hard to understand what it will do next.
Okay,
But at a fundamental level, it's still predetermined.
but why does it matter if it's predetermined or not, if the only way to predict anything would be to know every single piece of information?
Because I'm trying to argue against free will here.
What is your definition of free will?
Ah, and that's the thing because it's just a weird concept for me, and I do not really get it. Like free will, it's like it's being able to have like control of your behavior without having any external cause before it. In a way, you're free to decide what you will do. What you will do is not predetermined, but in reality, I think there is no free will because everything is already determined according to the arrangement of particles in your brain. It's already projected to go in a certain way. It's already determined, right? There's no like free will thing you have that is enabling you to act differently than how your brain is wired to act.
Um, would you agree that humans are the closest thing to having a free will out of anything else?
I would say um we have the most amount of internal causes, meaning we have the most internal control over our own behavior. But I would not argue that we are closer to free will than anything else. And by internal, I mean we have a system of reason and principles we act upon. Those are internal. They are internal causes, you could say, to our behavior. But ultimately, these principles themselves are the effects of some causes to form them.
Have you ever felt yourself torn between two decisions?
Yes, of course.
Like really like paid attention to the feeling of what it feels like to be right up into the moment of choosing. Have you ever really focused consciously on the feeling of making a decision?
Yes.
I think it's really hard to focus on that feeling and not say that you're making a choice.
That's sort of an argument on an intuitive level. On a rational level, it's still all predetermined. The process of being stuck between two decisions, it's itself already predetermined by some cause.
But whenever I focused on that feeling, it felt like it could go either way. I was just going to have to sort through information and make a decision for myself.
Yes, but what is sorting through this information for you? What
My
is the thing
my
that is
my consciousness is.
yeah, your consciousness, which is part of your brain. Your certain brain structures are already sorting through information to make the decision. And in turn, those brain structures are influenced by other brain structures. Those other brain structures are influenced by other causes, you know? Like,
I mean, you have a good argument, but I don't think that you can just say that that's the way it is for sure. Because, first of all, you
yeah,
are already assuming that consciousness is connected to the brain, right?
yes.
And that itself is not proven.
Okay, but still, on a rational level, we already agreed, though, that the consciousness is the human brain. It's not something
I
separate, right?
I agreed that with the information we have now, it is the the conclusion that makes the most sense with the information we have now.
Yeah.
Because there's correlations. As we all know, correlation does not equal causation.
Yes.
So we can infer that consciousness is connected to the brain, but we don't know that. So it's like with any other scientific concept. With the information we have, maybe we can say this, but it could always be proven wrong.
Yeah. That's an axiom that I formed at the beginning of our conversation, right?
I don't
So
remember.
I'm sorry?
I don't remember.
The axiom that the consciousness is the human brain, that it's not something separate, right?
I guess I just don't know. I don't know if I know what the definition of an axiom is.
Oh, it's something that you accept as like self-evident. You accept it as a truth, like already to begin your argument, right?
Right, but you know that you just have to agree to make the argument work. It's not
Yeah, yeah,
necessarily true.
exactly. But that's the axiom that we are arguing upon. So do you want to like examine this axiom itself now?
I mean, I already said there's not really enough information. I mean, consciousness is
All right.
confusing. I would just argue that the human brain is so complicated that it's really hard to fully understand or know. You know, we don't know all of the variables and what all is going on in the human brain to be able to know if it is predetermined or not for sure. Like it's really hard to know for sure. But I understand your point of view. If consciousness is connected to the human brain, that it is most likely that everything is predetermined.
Yes. Okay. So now just a few more things I want to make on this point. Like we're understanding psychology more, right? We're understanding how we act upon our instincts, and like pretty much most of the behaviors we do are irrational as opposed to rational. Like we're motivated by our emotions. We are biased. Would you agree with that?
I mean, it's a scale, and not everybody is on the same spot on the scale.
All right, but okay, so we can maybe steer this conversation back in a different direction. Um, y- Let me just bring up qualia again. Um, so you have pain and pleasure as qualia, right? We know that us human brains, we it's our best guess that human brains feel qualia of pain and pleasure, right? Animals feel qualia of pain and pleasure, right?
Yeah.
So you agreed in our previous discussion that happiness is something that is at the top of our moral pyramid. Is that correct? Or it's most likely at the top of our moral pyramid.
I don't know if I love using the word happy, but I would just say some type of a positive, experience and emotion.
Positive experience, right? I want you to focus on that positive experience. So you may know that human brains have positive experience and negative experience, right? Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. Animal brains can have positive and negative experience, right?
Yes.
And the simplest of brains could have positive and negative experience, right?
Yeah, probably.
Could you say at the lowest level of consciousness, like the most basic experience of particles and molecules, could they have positive and negative experience?
I know it's possible. Just don't know for sure.
So it's possible, let's assume that it's very possible that something like an electron could have a positive and negative experience, right? Could you say that this positive and negative experience determines the the action, the interaction of the electron, what it will do next?
I feel like the deeper you're going into this, the more muddied the definition of positive and negative experience is getting.
Oh, okay. Let's go back to what we define positive and negative experiences, right? Positive experience is pleasure, or it could be happiness. A negative experience is pain, or it could be like immense suffering. That's positive and negative experience, and uh, we act so that we have more positive experience and less negative experience, right?
Well, I mean, not everybody reacts that way.
How so?
I mean, just ask Gab.
Well, maybe you could say that some people have positive experience in the very negative experience itself, right? Masochism or masochism. I don't know how to pronounce it. Like some people like enjoy hurting themselves because the negative experience itself gives them positive experience. Do you get that? Like it's
Yeah,
sort of
I think
the
it's more than that. I think that's one of the possibilities. But I think maybe um, if they're trying to avoid one type of negative experience, they will accept a different negative experience in turn
why would they not choose a positive experience? Why would they choose a negative experience?
because they're illogical and they would have to go through a different type of effort to get the positive experience. So they just accept one of the negatives.
Could you say that there is some positive experience itself in deciding to choose a negative experience? Like someone, for instance, I don't know, does a stunt that they know is very dangerous, and it's going to hurt them. But they do it anyways. They have the thrill of doing the stunt itself. That is what gives them the positive experience. But in reality, it turns out that while they were trying to seek the positive experience, their actions in the present had negative consequences in the future. But they were still acting according to this positive experience.
I
That
think
was what they were.
I think you're using one of the best examples to explain your point of view. Like you're using like one of the best examples. What about an example of somebody killing themselves, or you know what I mean? Like,
Maybe they have the positive experience of the thought of um, doing something like that to themselves. It's the very positive experience that guides their thought processes and makes them do that action.
I would argue that it's more of a scale, and they're choosing a less negative experience in their minds, but it's not positive in their mind. They're just choosing the closest thing to a positive experience that they think they can choose from.
Yes, but it's still that they would rather have more of the positive and less of the negative, right?
Probably.
Do you think it's always that way with everybody, with everything we do? We always try to have more positive and we always try to have less negative.
Uh, I can't say for sure. I don't know enough about people.
But like based on the examples we gave, like you gave one of the most extreme examples, and I kind of like sort of argued how that could be seen as like the most positive experience in a very twisted way, right?
I mean, I could for sure say that the majority of people are seeking out the most positive, more positive than the negative, and they don't seek the negative; they seek the most positive in their mind. But I don't know.
Who,
I don't know if everybody does.
but how is it really possible to prefer the negative to the positive?
I didn't. I'm saying in their minds, it's the most positive. You know what I mean? But it doesn't mean it's a positive experience. It's just the least negative. You know what I mean? Which would be in the direction of positive.
Yes, but it's always in the direction of positive, right? Could you say that is true 100% of the time for everybody?
I could only say that for the majority of people, that's true, and everybody in my experience, that's true. But, I can't make a statement for everybody. I don't know everybody.
But how could you argue against it, though? It doesn't make sense for someone to deliberately go in the direction of the negative. That's kind of impossible, right? Like we consider the most extreme example, which is suicide,
Okay,
and I still
so
like.
so if I wanted to prove your point and I chopped my arm off, am I really getting a less or am I really getting a more positive experience just by proving you wrong than I would be getting if I didn't cut my arm off? That doesn't really
But you're
make.
the very positive experience is the satisfaction of proving me wrong. That's the positive experience here. It's
But
still
what
positive in a,
but what if I really am not getting that much of a positive experience? What if
but
I'm
you're
just
still going,
irrational? I think people can be irrational.
but they're still going off what they irrationally think is positive, right? Like it's the
I think that there is something weird about human psychology where people can be irrational in a way that they're not working on a positive negative system, that it can be there can be random, glitches in the matrix, you know what I mean?
okay. Well, I would agree with that then. Like there could be like external influences that are making them act really weird, but still, these external influences themselves are acting upon this negative positive arrow. They're always going in the direction of positive. And still, with in being influenced by these irrational things, they still try to go in the direction of the positive. Do you get what I'm saying here? Do you agree?
And I'm not for sure if I get what you're saying, because I think if somebody has severe mental illness, that it's possible that they will be irrational and not follow your system. And I don't know how that could fit into your system.
No, but I think they still would act like in the direction of the positive. They would still try to get pleasure in their own way, but it might look painful to us. But it's still their kind of way of going towards the positive.
Maybe, maybe.
And now, like, let's assume maybe like this is true that everything goes in the direction of positive and away from the negative 100% of the time in the human brains. And you say that this positive and negative experience could be on the level of the most simplest experience, which is like particles, right? Electrons. Do you think like an electron will always act according to this positive direction? Do you think it'll always go in the positive experience direction?
But see, at that point, the definition's a little bit different, because before, when you were talking about people and animals, you were saying positive is positive emotions like happy, pleasure, and all that, and negative emotions were pain and suffering and all that. And once you get down to those smaller scales, like below animals, you can't use those same words. So you would have to pick different words to describe what positive and negative are.
It would still be like a very, 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 very small amount of pain and pleasure. Like
I,
pleasure is
I,
the
I,
positive,
I don't think you can use those words.
but would it still be like the same thing in essence? Would it still be like the same types of experience that the most simple particles are running on, that our brains too are running upon? Like, is really what we are experiencing as pleasure and pain, positive and negative? is this really like a more general phenomenon of what's going on at the simplest, most reducible level?
I would say that things want to flow a certain way.
Yes, they want to flow a certain way. They
But
the way
I don't know what words to use for these things. I wouldn't use pain or pleasure.
it's their will. Let's use the word will. It's their will to move that way, right?
Yeah, to flow in a certain direction.
Yes, and that's this flow, this experience is comparable to what we experience as pain and pleasure. Do you think this is correct?
Yeah, you could it's just our certain type of way of experiencing it. That's just one of the ways of experience the flow that you're talking about is pain and pleasure.
Yes, I would agree with that. But still, there is this flow, and everything acts according to this flow, even us humans, right?
Sure.
Okay, and yeah, that's pretty much what Schopenhauer was arguing. Like that was his definition of the will, because the will always strives towards something. It's a striving that doesn't have knowledge; it just does, and it acts according to pain and pleasure. Like it always seeks pleasure and it always seeks to avoid pain, and that's the will, and it's part of all matter, and all matter is striving towards something. Do you think that makes sense? Do you think you would agree?
I guess so.
So, in an earlier discussion, again, we characterized the highest value as happiness. We could say pleasure or even positive experience. We all seek the positive. This is the ultimate value of all things, right?
Yeah.
Could you say that this ultimate value could include not just humans or even animals, but all things because we act upon this experience, this positive and negative experience? Could you say that?
I think you're just reiterating the previous stuff in a different way. And
How so?
I don't see the point in reiterating it in the way that you're doing it.
How is that a reiteration?
Because you already said that everything's wants to flow a certain way and is going to
Yes,
want to move in the direction of the flow.
yes,
And then now you're going back to the discussion about our primary like value or whatever is happiness or positive emotion, and then you're trying to um, compare that to everything else.
yes. So then could we make an ethics for not just human beings, but for this whole flow to begin with? Do you think there's some type of ethics we could do to make sure that this flow gets to what it wants to flow towards?
I mean, it's theoretically possible, but I don't think at this point we know enough about the flow to be able to determine where it wants to go exactly.
That is true. Now, what do you think this flow could be? So let's look at physical processes, right? Like if you, let's say you throw a rock. The rock is part of the flow, right? It's composed of particles. What what does this flow want to go towards in the rock? Where what is the rock going to do when you throw it off a cliff?
I mean, it's going to follow all the laws of physics and everything.
Yes. Yes, and what is it going to do? It's going to hit the earth, right?
Yes.
That is the flow of the rock, right?
Yes.
So let me see what I can say here. Yes. So what is this flow then? Is it gravitation? Is it air resistance? Is it attraction? Is it repulsion? What is this flow exactly? What physical phenomenon is this flow, do you think? Now you don't have
I would say that the flow is the culmination of all of those things.
yes, I would agree. It is the culmination of all those things. The rock is seeking to go towards its lowest energy state, right?
Sure.
So that's the flow of the rock. That's what gives the particles inside the rock the positive experience, right?
Yeah.
And this flow is all the forces acting upon that rock.
Yeah.
Let's say you have a black hole, right? You know what black holes are, right? They suck things in. Would you say that this flow, a flow of a star being sucked into the inside the black hole, would you say that's part of the flow for the star to be sucked inside the black hole?
Yes. Everything's a part of the flow. We already agreed with this.
Okay, yes. So it would be pleasurable for those particles inside that star to go towards the black hole. I just want you to reiterate upon this one more time, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so everything is part of this flow. Everything is seeking to go towards its lowest energy level. So, what do we know is going to happen to the universe in like 10 to the Google years, 10 to the 100 years? What's going to happen to the universe?
I mean, the universe. I mean, I guess it would.
Like all
I,
the matter in the universe that is part of this flow, what's it going towards?
that's a. That's a. It sounds like a big question right there. I don't.
It's very, very, very strange, but you have to look at where I'm heading towards this argument. What's it all going towards in the end? What's going to happen?
Well, I mean, it's following the flow, but I don't know what the flow is of the whole universe. I don't know where it's going because I don't know. Obviously, the universe is expanding, and inside the universe, the stars are going to die out. Planets are going to collide and crumble. But I
Yeah,
don't
but it's
know.
all
I don't know what's gonna. I don't know where the universe is flowing towards exactly.
but it's all flowing, right? All the processes in the universe are flowing towards the state.
Yeah,
Do you know what heat death is? The big freeze?
I mean, these are all uh, like these have to do with like planets and solar systems and stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But I don't. I mean, that's kind of a smaller scale than the universe.
But still, everything with let's say everything within the universe is part of the flow, right?
Well,
All the
yeah,
matter.
well, yeah, everything is, but it's like, where, what is outside the universe? What is the universe like flowing towards? What is outside of the universe?
Well, you can't be exactly sure what's outside of the universe, but we know what's inside of the universe. What's going to happen inside of the universe is heat death. That's what the flow is going towards. It's heat death. So when everything reaches absolute zero and nothing more can be done, it's at its lowest energy state. That is what the flow is heading towards. Would you agree?
Um, Probably.
Okay, so do you think this could be used to like literally universalize ethics? Do you think that what we form as ethics is really like just what we want? And what we want is part of this flow. And what this flow is really going towards is heat death. Would you argue that?
Like, are you the one arguing for nihilism now? I'm confused
I'm not arguing for nihilism. I'm asking like,
because
like
I'll just tell you, it seems like you're leading me to say that we should just kill everything because that's the state that it wants to be in. It wants to be at absolute zero. We should just try our best to speed up the flow.
maybe.
That's what it sounds like.
Yes.
Which is I think at least adjacent to like a nihilistic viewpoint.
Okay, but it's sort of the opposite of nihilism in that it doesn't take into account nothing, but it takes into account literally everything. And like
Well,
speeding up to reach this ultimate state, that's what's most ethical, right?
Well, the whole point of nihilism would be that everything is heading towards that state, so nothing matters because it's eventually going to reach that state.
So maybe if that's part of your definition of nihilism, then maybe you could say that is a nihilistic perspective. But ultimately, it makes logical sense based on what everything previous I've talked about in this discussion, right? That all matter seeks to go away from the negative towards the positive experience. And ultimately, what this positive experience is a lower energy state. And the lowest energy state is absolute zero, and that's heat death. So that is, in a sense, what is most ethical at the most supreme level. That is the highest good of all things.
So, for one, this is all like a hypothetical, and we're all just really guessing. If this is for
Yes.
sure this, then we can draw these conclusions, X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
So first of all, we have to assume what consciousness is. Second of
Yes.
all, we have to assume what the flow is, because we're
Yes.
not for sure what the flow is. And then
Yes.
if we could determine the flow without, any doubt, then we could technically make a moral system off of the flow.
Yes. And do you know why I said knowledge is also a value in its own self? Knowledge also has ethical weight
Yes.
because we do not, in fact, know if this is all correct. And it would be helpful if we had more knowledge so we can confirm what is the most ethical.
Right. We don't want to do a Romeo and Juliet, and we don't want to decide to burn everything down and then realize, oh wait, there was something, we didn't have all the information.
On some level, yes, that is kind of exactly what I'm saying. Yes.
Yeah, I get it.
So yeah, that's basically what I'm saying. That's what's most ethical is that it turns out we're just physical objects like everything else, and that what we're part of is this flow, this will.
It's possible.
It's possible, right? I mean, it is. That's kind of where the logic took me when I was thinking of this. But that's what I think is really behind it all, because you have to assume that both that A, everything is conscious to some level, everything has some level of experience, and B, everything feels pain and pleasure. They feel positive and negative experience.
So, what if the flow of one thing wants to go against the flow of another thing?
And that's basically the transfer of heat, right? Everything wants to be colder, right? But some things can't be colder because external influences force them to be hotter.
No, but
So,
I mean on a different scale. Like,
what do you mean?
so we already determined that humans want to flow in a more positive direction, positive experience.
Yes.
But the sun wants to burn out. So we're at conflict.
Yes, we are.
So how does that work when two things have a flow that conflict each other?
Well, the Earth itself isn't a conflict state. The Earth, first of all, wants to turn into a black hole. That's what gravitation wants to do to the Earth. But then you have the electron pressures that want to repel the Earth outward, right?
But that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. I'm talking about humans. Why, how do you deal with the problem that our flow isn't going to flow in the same exact direction as the environment around us?
Well, when the sun burns out, the rest of our bodies, the rest of the flow in our bodies will catch on fire. That's the positive direction of experience. So that's a good point, but still, like, it's sort of like wanting something, right? It's like a child wanting something, but the parents are saying, no, you cannot have this. This is not for your best interest. You get what I'm saying? So maybe we could evacuate the Earth and colonize other solar systems so we do not have to die out due to the sun. But eventually human civilization itself will collapse because like far, far, far into the future, um, it'll be too cold to sustain life. So still we are acting according to the flow.
But now you've developed and ran into a new issue, is that there's multiple flows, and sometimes the flows can go against each other. So how do
Yes,
you know which flow? Technically, now it doesn't matter. One flow is not more correct than the other flow. So now there's no true meaning in the flow at all.
that's a good thing you bring up, and that's what I was bringing up with my Earth example, right? The Earth has two directions. It wants to collapse into a black hole, right? That's the first direction. The second direction is that it wants to expand outward because of the electrons in all of our atoms repelling against each other. So it's a compromise. It stays at the same volume, right? It doesn't collapse into a black hole and it doesn't explode. That's two different flows competing against each other:
Yeah,
gravitation and pressure.
but the problem is that that's on a simple level. Once you get to the level of, like, I don't know what exactly to call it, like living things, like,
But living things are,
plants and animals, these things seem to have a different flow in a way, because these things want to survive, they want to have positive experiences, and that doesn't necessarily correlate with the flow that everything else wants to go in.
well, I would argue against that too because we are still deterministic. We are still determined by physical laws. We cannot escape physical laws, right?
But that doesn't change the fact that our flows conflict with other things.
But well, yes. So what are you arguing? That flows conflict against each other?
I'm arguing that there's no point in valuing the flow if flows can contradict.
Right, but yeah, and yeah, that's what I was talking about again with example of Earth that I was bringing up. It wants to turn to a black hole and it wants to explode, but it comes up with a compromise, right?
But
What will
see,
happen to the Earth?
that's a bit different though, because it's a simpler thing. The Earth is more it's more of a deterministic thing. It's like, oh, gravity
But
and
I
all this
argued,
stuff. But whenever
but
it comes with plants and stuff, these things want to survive, and it's not exactly like a a easy, like, oh, compromise, because animals can choose things. Animals can be like, oh, well, I have the choice to seek out, and so humans can choose. All right, well, if we get to the stage where we can, now we have the choice to get out of the flow of the sun burning out, and we can survive. Or if we're not to that point, we don't have a choice, and our flow just gets taken over by the flow of our surroundings. So there's a
yes,
conflict. So you cannot say that the flow of our environment is necessarily right, because it's not the only flow. Now we have our flow and what we want, and we could choose to avoid the flow of our environment to some extent.
still eventually we will not be able to do that because everything eventually far, far into the future will freeze over and we cannot possibly survive. It is literally against the
Um,
laws of physics.
it's I don't know if that's necessarily true. I don't have enough knowledge to say, but I
Well,
would say
well, maybe
it's theoretically possible with my limited knowledge that humans could gain the potential to actually create their own sun and create their own solar system, create their own universe to some
but
extent.
still, as time goes on, it eventually there will not be enough heat to work off. It will be impossible still.
I don't know enough
And
about physics to know if that's.
well, and that's the thing. That's good argument, and I've taken it into consideration before because maybe we could escape our own universe even. So we will escape the flow of our own universe, right? But still, like we are bound to the universe. We are acting upon physical laws, and we will never be able to defy these physical laws, right? We do not have free will of our own. We are still locked within the physical laws. So we are still acting according to the flow of the universe. As much as we would intellectually say we aren't, like we are fighting against the flow, in actuality, we are still part of this flow, and we will still decay like everything else, despite our best efforts.
But there is wiggle room. We are able to manipulate, and well, at the very least, we're able to manipulate the flow of things.
But we were still part of the flow. We were really just the flow manipulating other flows. And in turn, other flows are manipulating our flow, right?
I don't know if that's technically correct.
Yeah, that's why the free will argument I had with you was important. Because we are still physical objects in the end.
But then, even then, you could argue that even if everything's deterministic, I could argue that once, something complicated as the brain develops, then it almost develops its own flow that can conflict with other flows and try to manipulate other flows.
And now this is a philosophical position known as emergence, right? That the wholes are more than a sum of its parts. That complex processes have something extra that is not part of the simple parts. It's reductionism versus emergentism. You are thinking that there's some type of emergence within the human brain.
Yes.
I do not. I think it can all be reduced to its parts. It is all just the physical laws within our brains.
But then, like I said, then why do we have a flow that opposes the outside external world?
If you uncover it more, it really doesn't. It's intellectual. We say it opposes our environment, but we are part of our environment. There is no distinction here. Like, man is nature. It's not man versus nature. Man is nature. We are part of our environment. There is no separation.
But the difference is our will is more complicated than inanimate objects. Inanimate objects just follow a different type of will. We actually want things, and we could want to go do this thing, but then the sun blows up, and now our want is destroyed.
Yes, exactly. Our want, our complex want, is really composed of simpler wants. Our brains are composed of particles, and these particles have simple wants. But we summarize this system of simple wants as a complex want. But really, it's all part of the physical laws, the simpler wants, the simpler positive direction of experience.
In your explanation, I think that was a better argument for my side than your side.
How so?
Because you just explained that you think that it's just a amalgamation of the simpler things. But if that was, yes, then how comes since it's gotten more complicated, it actually opposes the outside flow?
It doesn't. It says it does, but really it's mistaken. It's not rational here. We like to think we're perfectly rational, but we are not rational. It's still, the flow goes the way it wants still.
If I want to live, I want to go out, yes, and have pleasure. That's a flow.
This reminds me of a good argument. We want to live forever, right? We want to live 1,000 years long. But we actually can't, because entropy prevents us from living long. Our brains decay. So as much as we want to live, as much as we want to survive, we will eventually succumb to the physical force of entropy.
Isn't it theoretically possible to reverse and stop aging? We've already done similar things in the past.
Yeah, and as much as we try to escape the solar system because the sun will blow up, eventually we cannot sustain this forever, because things will cool down to a certain point that our body temperature cannot be maintained. It's too cold, right? And even if we program our bodies to survive the extreme cold, eventually it will stop running because there's a lack of heat. So it all eventually goes towards heat death, and nothing else could be done.
We have to make a lot of assumptions to get to that point.
Now, a lot of assumptions, but it's so far a lot of assumptions that you have agreed with, right? So it doesn't sound too insane, I hope, right?
I mean, it's not insane, but I'm just saying it's not like it's not
It requires, yes, and that's why we need knowledge. We need to justify, right?
sure, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know what you call it. I value being more open and less, following. Oh well, this is the most likely, so let's just assume it's true. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and yeah, we certainly can try to look for other evidence, other counter evidence, but so far I have not really encountered much counter evidence. But yeah, I get what you're saying. Well, all right, I'm kind of a little bit out of time now.
If you liked this video, please consider liking and subscribing for more content. And feel free to leave a comment down below.